Hi everybody, welcome to Human Anatomy Physiology Lab 2. I'm Christina Wallace. We're going to talk about exercise 30, the heart, today. You have lots of video materials open to you, so I'm looking at the online lab report instructions right now. Michael Patterson does a wonderful job of just taking you page by page through the lab, telling you what you need to do. So I just want to draw your attention to a couple of things. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the words we're going to use on questions. And so I've made a little note right here. These words, structures, vessels, layers, chambers, valves, are the words that you're going to see on questions. So make sure that you're able to answer. If I have a line pointing at something and I say name the structure, I could have the very same line pointing at that very same thing and say name the chamber, and it would be a different answer. The second resource available to you today is a video about tracing a drop of blood through the heart. And there's a video under this week's Moodle that does exactly that, and I'll take you there right now. So this is the video of the tracing a drop of blood through the human heart.
Two connected chambers, the right atrium and the right ventricle. These two sides, or pumps, of the heart are not directly connected with one another,
etc. The other video that you have at your disposal is a video that Michael Patterson made where he goes over a prosected pig heart. And this is Michael's video.
When we say prosected, we mean that we've made incisions into a couple areas, but the heart is basically intact.
Okay, and here we are at the heart itself, your lab report. And so I'm just going to draw your attention to a couple of things. Page 2, where it's asking you to briefly describe the functions of stuff. I've done an example for you, but what I want you to think about is where is the vessel sending blood, where is it receiving blood from, if that's appropriate, and whether the blood is high O2 or low O2. Is it richly oxygenated on its way to body tissues, or is it poorly oxygenated on its way back to the heart? On page 5, you have a question that asks you to outline the flow of blood through the heart. So I just showed you the Moodle video that will walk you through that process. But just kind of remember, you have to name all the vessels, all the valves, and all the chambers that the blood is going to go through. And you're going to start with the 3 vessels that enter the right atrium, and then you're going to end with the aorta. And literally you can just draw, right atrium goes into, you can spell it out, I'm just being quick. So you go from the right atrium through the right AV valve to the right ventricle. And you can just draw it with words and little arrows like that. Then the last page of your lab manual is a heart checklist, and so it's a good place to check vocabulary. And these are the things that you would have to find if you were looking at a prosected pig heart in class. And so I just want to draw your attention again to the question words that we're going to be using. Layers, describe those types of things. Look at all the places that you see the word structure. Look at how we're going to ask about valves, etc. And then layers, structures, valves, chambers, and vessels. And so chambers, vessels. All right, so now we're looking at the heart kind of and how it's oriented in the chest. And so the apex is this pointy part down at the inferior end, and you can see it kind of points towards the left a little bit. So that's how you could use apex to tell you if you're looking at the front or back of the heart. The base of the heart is this kind of broad area where all the big vessels come out, the flat triangular side, and the mediastinum is this area in between the right lung and the left lung, where the heart sits. The heart is wrapped in a serous membrane system called the pericardium. So remember, we have a parietal membrane that will line the cavity, then we'll have a visceral membrane that will cover the organ, and there will be fluid in between to reduce friction. And so The visceral pericardium lives right here on the surface of the heart. Same thing as epicardium, we'll see in a minute. Then there's going to be a fluid-filled space in this space. And then the parietal pericardium is on the outside. And then the fibrous pericardium is all of this stuff, and it's just dense connective tissue that helps to attach the pericardium to other tissues for stability, so your heart isn't able to beat itself up under your lung or something. So here's another of our vocabulary words. Here are the layers of the heart. And so that's very different than structure or chamber, correct? So layers of the heart, there's only 3 answers that work. Epicardium, myocardium, and endocardium. Epicardium is on the outside. It's the same thing as the visceral pericardium. Myocardium is the muscle tissue of the heart, and so that's all of this stuff. And so if I put a pin right here in number 2 and I say name the structure, your answer is going to be interventricular septum. But if I say name the layer, then the answer will be myocardium. And then endocardium is the shiny inner lining. So the shiny surface of every part of the heart is going to be covered by endocardium, and that's the actual epithelium that the blood touches. So here are the big blood vessels that are exiting from the heart. And so the first one is the ascending aorta. And so we can see the ascending aorta right there. So right after you leave the aortic semilunar valve, the blood's gonna go into the ascending aorta, slam shut the valve, then it's gonna go into the aortic arch, and then it will go out the descending aorta to the body. The pulmonary artery is right here. So the pulmonary trunk or pulmonary artery is the first place blood goes when it exits the right ventricle. And when the blood gets into that pulmonary trunk, it will slam shut the pulmonary valve. And then that blood's going to go to pulmonary arteries that are headed towards the lungs. So arteries go away from the heart. So even though this has low oxygenated blood, it's still going in an artery away from the heart to the lungs in the pulmonary circulation. The superior vena cava drains the top of the body here, and the inferior vena cava drains the lower part of the body into the right atrium. Pay attention to where high oxygenated and low oxygenated blood is. All right, so I'm going to use this picture to go over a few different kinds of structures. So other vessels coming off the aortic arch, the first one goes to the right, and it's the brachiocephalic trunk, and it's going to turn into the subclavian artery and feed into the right common carotid artery. The second one is the left common carotid artery. And the third thing coming off the aortic arch is the left subclavian artery. On the back of the heart, we can see, well, we can see on the front too. So we can see the pulmonary arteries going away, taking low oxygenated blood to the lungs. And then we can also see the pulmonary vein or pulmonary veins here and here, bringing richly oxygenated blood back to the left atrium to send it out to the body systemic circulation via the left ventricle. Some structures on the heart. So we can see kind of some grooves on the front of the heart where blood vessels live. We can also see these grooves on the back of the heart where blood vessels live. That's called an interventricular sulcus. And it's going to have an interventricular artery. And so on this side, on the front, it's going to have an anterior interventricular artery. in the anterior interventricular sulcus, and on the posterior, it's going to have a posterior interventricular artery in the posterior interventricular sulcus. We're also going to have an atrioventricular sulcus. And so that's where the pink line is right here, the atrioventricular sulcus. And on the posterior side, we're going to see a big vessel that lives in that atrioventricular sulcus, often called the coronary sulcus. And that's going to be our coronary sinus that lives in the coronary sulcus. Now we're just going to look at the valves of the heart. So we have 4 valves. We have 2 semilunar valves that are exits from the ventricles, and we have 2 atrioventricular valves that are valves between atria and ventricles. So aortic semilunar valve occurs right here, and it's our exit from the left ventricle. The pulmonary semilunar valve is right here, and it's our exit into the pulmonary artery away from the right ventricle. Then we have our 2 AV valves. So our left AV valve is also named mitral valve, also named bicuspid valve. And I say it has 2 cusps, and that's what I mean. I mean by that, I mean 2 little flaps. And so the one on the left has 2 flaps, and it only takes 2 lines to draw an L. So the left one is the bicuspid, and then the right one has 3 flaps. It takes 1, 2, 3 lines to draw an R. So the tricuspid is on the right. Here are a couple other interesting structures I want to draw your attention to. So pectinate muscle. Pectinate muscle is the kind of background bumps and texture that happens in the atria. So in the atria, the background bumpy stuff like that is going to be pectinate muscle. And then the background texture in the ventricles, that is not a papillary muscle, just the general background texture in the ventricles is called trabeculae carnae, or the meat web. And so trabeculae means kind of branchy and carnae means meat. And so I'm just looking at all of these kind of bumps on the back of the ventricle that doesn't have any cords attached to it. That's trabeculae carnae. And then papillary muscles. Papillary muscles are these bumps right here that have cords attached to them. So this bump and this bump and these 3 bumps, these are papillary muscles. And they have tendinous cords or chordae tendinae attached to them. And so tendinous cords are all of these structures that hold the valve flaps down so that they don't prolapse and send blood backwards up into the atria. And then just a little bit about pulmonary versus systemic circulation. And so pulmonary circulation is all this stuff kind of up here. So we're leaving the right ventricle and we're going to the lungs to drop off CO2 and pick up oxygen. And so remember, arteries are going away from the heart. So these are pulmonary arteries going away up to the lungs, and then pulmonary veins go towards heart. And so pulmonary veins bring richly oxygenated blood back to the right atrium. All of the systemic circulation is this stuff down here that goes out to the body. So arteries are going to take oxygenated blood out to the body. It's going to go into the capillary beds. It's going to drop off O2, pick up CO2. Veins are going to take it back to the heart. and we start the whole cycle over again. Just a little bit about coronary circulation. And so I'm going to talk about coronary circulation for a second. The blood the blood that's in your chambers right here doesn't do anything to nourish or bring oxygen to your heart tissue at all. It's these vessels. This vessel right here, these vessels, these are coronary arteries, and they feed the heart muscle. And if you get a block in one of them, that's what gives you a heart attack. And so coronary arteries take freshly oxygenated blood right from the ascending aorta, like it's the very first blood that gets dropped off, is going to go out to the coronary circulation, so the heart gets the freshest, most oxygen-rich blood. And then when the venous return is going to go into the coronary sinus, which will dump into the right atrium and then back to pulmonary circulation. And that is the lab for today. You have lots of resources to look at. I'll see you next week.